Hello and welcome to everyone that's joining us today for this exciting webinar, What to Expect in U.S. Immigration in 2023. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you, depending upon where in the world you are joining from. It is really a pleasure to have you with us today. My name is Ron Hoppe. I have the privilege of serving as CEO of WorldWide HealthStaff Solutions, and we are joined today by a very good friend of ours and a very good colleague and a personal friend, Mike Hammond. I'm going to introduce Mike more fully here in just a moment, but as others continue to log on, we've had almost 1,000 individuals like yourselves register for our event today. Just a couple of quick housekeeping things. First of all, we always appreciate, for those of you that have joined us here live, if you would just take a moment and in the chat box or the chat feature of this webinar, just type in for us, please, the country that you are joining us from. Some of you are already doing that, but if you haven't yet shared that information with us, it's always very interesting to us to see how many different countries are represented on our various webinars. I think thus far, in the last 3 or 4 years, the all-time record is something around, I believe it was 39. So let's see how we do today. So please take a moment and just let us know where you're joining us from. Secondly, just want to let you know that everyone who registered for this event today is going to receive a recording of today's presentation by email, and you should be looking for that email about 24 hours from now. So sometime tomorrow, at this same time, you should be receiving an email from us that will have a link to a recording of today's session. And I would simply say feel free to review that as often as you wish. And please also feel free to share that link with any of your colleagues that you think may be interested or would benefit from the session and the information that's going to be shared here today. And there's going to be a lot. So just a couple of things to be aware. An important part of our time together today is for us and for Mike to be able to respond to your questions. And for us to be able to do that, I'm going to ask that you please type in your question in the chat feature. And towards the end of our time together, we'll get to as many of your questions as we can. This is not an appropriate format or forum where we are able to specifically respond to a case-specific question that you might have, but certainly we're happy to respond to questions that are going to relate to the information presented today and to just any immigration-related question generally. So we welcome your questions. Please feel free to type them in at any time during the presentation. And as I said, we'll do our best towards the end of the presentation to respond to as many of those as we can. So without further ado, it is my great privilege this morning here, local time in the U.S., to introduce to you our featured guest today, Mike Hammond. Mike is the senior partner and founder of the Hammond, Neal, Moore law firm in Cincinnati, Ohio. Mike and I don't know if we want to admit to this, Mike, we've known each other for, I would say, more than 20 years, and we've had the privilege and the opportunity of working together for most of that time, and we continue to work together closely today in serving a number of U.S. healthcare employers. I consider Mike to be one of the foremost experts in the United States, and I don't use that word expert lightly. He is a leading voice in all matters related specifically to not only immigration, but specifically healthcare immigration. And it is a great privilege for us to have Mike take some time from his schedule today to join us. So with that, Mike, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Ron.
It's been a while since we've done this thing, so I'm excited for the time that we'll have to do this today. So, Mike, probably just a good place to start. At a high level, would be interested in your take on all things related to COVID. That we all lived through that experience and the impact that COVID had, perhaps initially during the time of the pandemic, and what lingering effects from COVID might we still be seeing as it relates to, healthcare immigration and processing times.
Okay. Thanks, Ron. I appreciate that. Very nice introduction. And yes, 20 plus years is, with the emphasis on the plus, is probably accurate. So appreciate that. And it's nice to join here today and try to give you guys some information. And also, as Ron mentioned, at the end, answer some questions. So first of all, with respect to COVID and the impact, the most obvious is the negative impact. And again, we're only talking immigration here, so we're not talking about all the healthcare system impact. But we had obviously consular disruption to the as a result of COVID-19. We had think about the consulate staff themselves. A lot of individuals were sick. A lot of people moved back to the States. Just a total, complete disruption to normal consular activities. And those are continuing even to this day, in that the staffing levels are not up to where the consulates had pre-COVID. And so those are all fairly obvious that most people would assume that would have happened. But I think some of the things that people are not so aware of is the positive effects of COVID on legal immigration. And let me explain that. Most RNs come to the U.S. via green cards, and those are called immigrant visas. And there's a certain limited number given out per year that is a statutory number, and it's 140,000 immigrant visas per year, give or take a little bit. There's a rule that hadn't been used since the 70s, though, that says that unused numbers on the family side spill over to the next fiscal year on the employment side. So what happened during COVID? Consulates were completely shut down. Family members were not looking to immigrate because of not only the consulates being shut down, but also disruptions in their own lives, just like in your lives. And so there was a large number of unused family visas that then spilled over to the employment side. To give you some idea as to how many, in fiscal year 2021, which would have been the year that COVID started in calendar year 2020, we got an extra 120,000 visas. So the employment side went from 140 to 260,000. In fiscal year 2022, we got actually more. We actually got 140,000 extra visas that spilled over to the employment-based side. And for the fiscal year that we're in right now, we got an extra almost 60,000, total 57,000 that spilled over as a result of unused family-based visas, all associated with COVID and the COVID delays. What that has meant as a practical effect to you looking to immigrate to the U.S. is no retrogression. Priority dates current as a result of that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Mike, what is there any way of maybe projecting or anticipating when the various U.S. embassies might return to what we would consider to be full staffing or normal operations?
I think that the Department of State continues to provide reports as to we're getting close, we're there. I think to some degree we're in the new normal now. We've seen a significant improvement in consulates, in particular in Manila, over the last 9 months. And I'm not saying they're completely back to where they were, but I think they're fairly close. We see some disruptions from time to time. We had disruptions in London back in the summer, and some other places where there'd be disruptions. But I think to some degree, those might almost be the new norm. So I think we're fairly close.
All right. Well, good. It's hopefully COVID is well in the rearview mirror, and it's not something that we'll be talking about in any meaningful way ever again.
Let's hope so.
So, Mike, you had mentioned the carryover of family visas, etc. And one of the things from our perspective in terms of COVID impact, I think that's really affected our business here at WorldWide HealthStaff is just the widespread acceptance of remote or video interviewing. So that, of course, allows us to connect with applicants in many parts and virtually all parts of the world, many of which we may not have been in contact with in the past. So just interested in any thoughts you might have in terms of, are there any countries where applicants have, a greater difficulty immigrating to the U.S.? We're aware of, visa backlogs are different in some countries and so on and so forth. So just for the benefit of those that are joining us from, many, many different countries here today, just interested in your take on, what are the countries that have unique or specific situations or circumstances that impact on immigration processing, etc.
Okay. Well, the most obvious are India and China, which have extremely long lines in the EB3 category, which would be the category that RNs would immigrate from. The India line is anywhere, depending on who you ask, from 10 to 20 years long. The line for people from PRC from China mainland is anywhere from 5 to 8 years, which essentially means that it's not practical to recruit or to hire or to be hired in an RN position from either of those countries because the line is simply too long. Now, a couple of points on that is the line you're in as an individual is based upon your country of birth, not based upon your citizenship. And that's going to be important here in just a second because I'm going to give you a way to still get here. Another point that I think is important that a lot of people don't know is there's this concept of cross-chargeability, which means that if you're married to someone who was born in another country from your country, you can take on their country for purposes of what line to get in. So if you're unmarried right now, and don't be using this as an excuse to get divorced, but if you're unmarried right now, you may want to consider that. Are they good looking? Are they nice? Are they smart? Are they funny? But where were they born at? That may be a major factor. But back to how you can possibly still come to the U.S. with long lines for India and China. And it's not a perfect solution, but the easiest way to do it is to go through Canada. And immigrate to Canada. A lot of great immigration programs in Canada, very welcoming to healthcare workers. And once you're in Canada and have Canadian citizenship, you then become eligible for a U.S. TN work visa that RNs are covered under that category. So a variety of other allied workers such as med techs, OTs, PTs, et cetera. And then you can come and work in the U.S. on a TN. It does not change your ability to immigrate to the U.S., but it changes your ability to work in the U.S. So give that in mind. A second country that we sometimes don't think about is there are still certain countries where the NCLEX is not offered in those countries. And so those countries can be a little more difficult to immigrate from because you're going to have to travel to another country, get a visa, make arrangements in order to take NCLEX in that country. But aside from those two things, we're seeing very little issues at different U.S. consulates, even in countries where they're not as common and not as accepting normal of Filipino, say, RNs. So sometimes there's some little training issues about visa screens and things like that. Those are all minor. So there's no major hurdles from any country in the world outside of India and China.
Sure. Aside from India and China and the visa backlogs that exist there, Mike, is there any other country currently where maybe the U.S. has some sort of sanction or embargo that would impact on immigration?
Generally speaking, there are a variety of, from time to time, embargoes and kind of holds where you'd need a waiver and things like that. But generally, those are person specific and can be kind of dealt with, and they change from time to time. So right now we're seeing people immigrate from virtually everywhere that would have the proper educational system, proper being able to actually get the test and things like that. So generally that's not a major issue right now.
Okay, terrific. Thanks for that. Next, we want to touch on, Mike, a topic that is first and foremost on the minds of international candidates that are either in process or thinking about starting their journey to the U.S., and that's around the question of how long will it take, right? That's the universal question that we receive from applicants and quite frankly, U.S. employers alike. But in the context of the applicants that have joined us here today, interested in having you share, what the current priority, maybe just a brief explanation of what a priority date is, in case there's any question, and then just what the priority date situation is currently and what you anticipate in the foreseeable future.
Okay, sure. So your priority date is your spot in a line. It's your spot in the queue to ultimately get a green card. So to get a green card, you have to go through a legal process that we refer to as the I-140 for RNs. Different allied occupations have to go through a different process. But you have to get through that legal process, and part of that is paperwork and processing and things like that. But you also have to be at the front of the line. And they call the front of the line being current. That's the phrase that's used. And you're in a line based upon a category. There are essentially 5 categories. There's essentially 3 being used for employment-based. RNs fall under what's called the EB3 category. And then they're split up by country. And the Department of State controls the priority dates. And they issue something called the Visa Bulletin. They issue it each month for the next month. So here today is January 11th. Probably today, tomorrow, the next day, we will get February's bulletin out. And so we will know what they've said are the dates where you're at the front of the line. Think of it as you go to a deli on a busy Saturday morning, pick up a number from the counter, and the number you look at, it says 63, and they're calling out number 33. You're in that queue until they get up to 63. So for certain countries, there's a long queue, and you anxiously look at the bulletin each month and see, hey, did my date move forward? And these dates do not move forward in any uniform fashion. They move forward based upon the demand that the consulate sees being used by the Department of State, the consular officers, and the USCIS when they adjust 45s. One of the things, the Visa Bulletin is something you can subscribe to. It's free. It's at the Department of State's website, and you can get it emailed to you. You can actually go online and look at it each month. And one of the things that I encourage people to do, in addition to looking at the chart, because if you're from the Philippines or from the rest of the world, if you're from any country other than India and China, you want to look at what they call the rest of the world category, and you want to see a C there. And that means there's no line for you to come to the U.S. as a, say, an RN. You simply have to get through the legal process. When there is a line that's formed, there'll be a date, and you need to be in that queue before that date in order to finish your process. But one of the things I encourage you to do is at the back page of the Visa Bulletin, there is some notes. and predictions that the person at the Department of State is a guy named Charlie Oppenheimer, who's been doing this for a million years. And he provides some predictions. So, for example, I pulled up the November 2022 bulletin, and there was a note that said, increased demand in employment's second category may necessitate the establishment of a worldwide final action date in the coming months to hold number use within the maximum allowed under the fiscal year 2023 annual limit. This situation will be continually monitored and any necessary adjustments will be made. This tells people who are in the second preference category, the EB2 category, most PTs, most OTs, physicians, a lot of engineers would be in that category, not RNs, that, hey, I'm telling you in November that at some point in this fiscal year, there's going to be some retrogression. So we always look at this bullet, at the notes, at the back of the bulletin to see what is Charlie saying about retrogression coming down. Now, keep in mind that the Department of State uses a use it or lose it method of these immigrant visas. So I mentioned at the beginning of our talk, we had 140,000 visas per year allocated because of the spillover from family. For example, this year we're going to have 197,000. The government's fiscal year starts October 1st of each year and runs until September 30th of the next year. That's what they call their fiscal year. Any visa numbers not used by September 30th are lost. So this is a situation where we have 197,000 that we started out on October 1st, and we want to use up all 197,000. Now, here's why that becomes important when you're looking at dates. Retrogression at the end of the fiscal year, August and September, is not a bad thing. It's not indicative of retrogression coming in the future. It's simply indicative of the fact that we used up all the 197,000 for this year. So when you're looking at visa bulletins and you're looking at them, don't look at them just today's bulletin, especially the summer ones where we tend to get some more retrogression. So our goal is to use all the visas up, and that's great. Now, here's the good news for this year, okay? First of all, we're already a third of the way through the fiscal year. It started in October. We've already had 4 bulletins. There's no retrogression now. Nobody's expecting retrogression in February. We're going to be almost halfway through the year without even anyone predicting any retrogression in the EB3, Philippines, or other world category. Most people believe that there's not going to be retrogression in the EB3 category this fiscal year. You know, I tend to be a little cynical, and I'm not quite as, I certainly wouldn't bet my house on it, but I would probably bet a little bit on it. So I think the general feeling is we're pretty positive on this fiscal year, that dates are going to continue to stay current, which is simply meaning that you need to get through the legal process, the practical process, and for this fiscal year, which is what most of you are concerned about, we're going to be safe.
All right, that's great news, Mike. Thanks for that thorough explanation, and really excited to hear that going forward here for the foreseeable time, we expect the EB3 category to remain current. As we kind of stay on this theme of sort of COVID impact a little bit, Mike, one of the things that we're hearing and having conversations with employers with is an interest in looking at other occupations besides nursing, looking abroad to recruit in other occupations, just in an effort to respond to, the growing needs here in the U.S. So can you maybe just briefly touch on, some of the other health occupations that you see being recruited to the U.S. most commonly, and maybe some of the different visa options that are available to different occupations?
Sure. So I'm going to break this up into kind of 2 groups by visa category, and then we'll tie it back into healthcare occupations. First of all, there's 2 general paths to get here to the U.S. There's an H-1 path and there's a green card path. We've already talked a little bit about the green card path for RNs, and that's the most common thing we're talking about. But there are other occupations that can come here directly on a green card as well. For example, CNAs are individuals that don't qualify for the RN route because they don't have the qualifying NCLEX passageway, and maybe they don't want to be an RN. This is my career, this is what I want to do, but I'd like to come work in the US. There are a lot more employers that have been willing to sponsor CNAs. Now, the process is different for an RN. There's something called PERM, or labor certification. That's a step at the beginning that can take, depending on where you're at and the facility you're going to, can take an extra year and a half into the process. Could be as short as 9 months, but for most facilities, it's going to be that extra time frame, which of course increases how long it takes you to get here. If you're an RN today, you're probably looking at being here in roughly a year is probably a good kind of average if we were starting a new case today for most facilities. If you're a CNA, you're going to add maybe as much as a year and a half onto that process. So that's significantly longer. In addition, CNAs come under what's called an other worker category, and there is retrogression in that category. And so there could be a delay as well. And so you might be looking at more 2.5 to 3 years to be here as a CNA, but it certainly is possible. Now, on the H1 side, H1s are available not for RNs, but for a lot of other occupations, med techs, OTs, PTs, pharmacists, etc., can come in under the H1B category. And how you come under the H1B category is dependent upon the type of facility that's hiring you. There are what are called cap-exempt facilities. Those are nonprofits affiliated with universities. So, for example, a typical university system here in Cincinnati, we have something called University Hospital. That, if you're football fans, was just big in the news over the last couple of weeks for taking care of the football player that had a heart attack on the field last Monday night. University Hospitals are cap exempt. They're nonprofit. They're affiliated with, obviously, the University of Cincinnati. That type of system can hire OTs, PTs, med techs, pharmacists, etc., year-round without respect to the limit on H-1Bs. So if you're a med tech and being hired by, again, here at the University of Cincinnati Hospital, you can honestly be here in 6 weeks, 8 weeks kind of time frame. It can be that fast. If you're not being hired by a cap-exempt employer, the employer has to go through something called the visa lottery. It's actually truly a lottery. It's a random picking of registrations submitted for H1s. Last year, we had almost 500,000 submissions for 85,000 spots. So your odds are not great, but they're certainly possible. And there are a lot of facilities that will put people through the H-1B lottery. Now, there are also green card options for PTs, OTs, med techs, and other allied occupations. And they don't have the same limitations as the CNAs that I talked about earlier, because they're not in the other worker category, so they don't have quite as long of a queue. But they do, except for PTs, have to go through the PERM and the labor cert process. So it will take longer than an RN. A lot of facilities historically have sponsored med techs directly through a green card process because it was a sure route. Took longer, but was sure. Right now, because the green card processing is getting longer for med techs, more facilities are looking at doing both. I'm going to try you in the H1 lottery. If it works, great, I'll bring you in. If not, I'm going to have this green card path for you. So it's an individualized kind of practice based upon what your facility wants. It's also individualized personally for you as to what's best for you. So, for example, if you are a single person coming in on H-1B visa, may be the best course of action for you. You get here faster, you can start working right away, and all's good. However, if you're married and you're a two-income family and your spouse wants to work, then coming in on H-1B may not be a great personal option for you because your spouse can't work. So you may say, I'd rather have the longer path because then I come in as a green card holder. And so that's the kind of thing that your staffing agency, your recruiting company like WorldWide, the facility you're going to all talk about to make sure there's a good match, not just from the legal side, but from your side as well. So there are a lot of options available right now for allied and other occupations, but they are not the simple, straightforward route that RNs have. But there's definitely options and great opportunities.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that, Mike. And I think if I was to summarize the point that you were making in this regard, is it's from a candidate's perspective, it's really very, very important that they're working with a recruitment firm and an immigration attorney that is very well experienced and can lay out all of these options for them in a straightforward, understandable way. We're going to fast forward here and talk about, if we could, for a few minutes about NVC, Mike. A lot of questions these days around what's going on at NVC, questions about can we, is there such a thing as expedited processing? Why was my friend's case processed in X time and mine's taking 3 times X? So take a few moments, Mike. I think this is something that's really of interest to a lot of people, and just share with us your thoughts on NVC, what's currently going on there.
Okay. First of all, one of the things to keep in mind is that when we're talking timing, we're talking timing today. This is what we're seeing today. And there are published data that the different government agencies provide, but we do internal data. And one of the reasons we're able to do internal data is our law firm processes anywhere from 3,000 to 4,000 RNs per year. So we have a large number of people going through the process at the same time. So we have our hand on kind of current processing times. We also are good friends and work with a lot of other law firms that also do similar numbers. And so we all share data and we all talk and we all kind of conspire together against the government in a good way, not in a bad way. But the processing time you're hearing today, if you were on one of these calls 4 months ago, you would have heard different timing. If you're on a call 4 months from now, you may hear it again. And timing doesn't always get slower. It can get better. So, but this is what we're talking about today. From the time your I-140 is approved, we're seeing most individuals have interviews and have their green card issued in as short as 6 months to about 12 months. That's the range. Now, that's a pretty big range, though, especially if you have a friend who has a cousin who has a brother who got it in 7 months and you're in 9 months. That still seems like a whole lot longer to wait because you're 2 months short of your friend's brother's cousin. But that whole overall range is not a huge range when we're looking at historical government processing times. Now, specifically relating to NVC, what happens once your case is approved at the I-140 stage, there's a notification that goes to the NVC that said, hey, we're one government agency. We've approved this case. Now it's your turn to take over this case. That's the transmission. If you were processed through the Texas Service Center, which, by the way, the facility that's hiring you does not have a choice as to where to process cases. It's statutorily determined based upon geography that you must file here. But if you were in Texas, back in the winter, we had major delays in Texas. There was operational issues in getting them to send notices of approval from the Texas Service Center to the NVC. Those are resolved now, but back then it was a major problem. Generally, we're seeing 4 to 6 weeks right now. A fee bill then comes out. Now, here's where you get some discrepancies. There are a lot of agencies, and personally, I think this is a good practice, but not everyone practices this way, who doesn't pay the fee bill until you have your visa screen in hand, or at least your English test passed. I personally think that's a good option, but not everyone does, and I'm certainly not in charge of what people do and what they don't do. So sometimes you may be comparing your case to one of your friends, and their fee bill's already paid, but yours isn't. Maybe the reason your fee bill isn't paid is because you haven't passed the English test yet, or you don't have your visa screen in hand. But let's assume you do have that. Fee bill's paid. We're normally seeing what's called DQ, which when I see DQ, I think Dairy Queen, which if you're not obviously here in the U.S., when you get to the U.S., visit a Dairy Queen. It's ice cream, soft serve. It's great. It'll change your life. It's all wonderful. See DQ, but DQ in the context of immigration and National Visa Center means documentally qualified. It means that all the paperwork that we need to process your case is now in our hands, and you are DQ'd. So it's a good thing, not a bad thing. Then interview. And we're seeing that DQ process averaging right now right around 3 months. Interview is going to vary by consulate. Some consulates are fast, some are slow. Some consulates, but generally we're seeing 3 to 6 months. Now, people ask all the time about expediting, okay? First of all, during the heyday of COVID, when consulates were for the most part closed, expediting was super critical because the consulate, if they had any staff at all, were open at all, would process a healthcare case where they were shut down for everybody else. So expediting actually meant something. Today, and frankly, for the last several months, if everybody's expedited, then nobody's expedited. So we put in an expedite request in every case. And most of them get approved, and it doesn't really change much. It all makes us feel better because we can say, hey, I got expedited, but in reality, we're seeing that the processing times are roughly the same. Now, there are delays in cases. There are delays in cases because there's humans involved in these systems. There are humans involved at the National Visa Center. There's humans involved at the consular. Some of the issues are obvious. They got your country of birth wrong. So they think you have an Indian passport, but you were really born in Kuwait, and you should come under the Kuwait country of birth. So they've done something that's obvious like that. You were working in Abu Dhabi, but your interview said that it was supposed to be Manila because they misread the request. There are things like that that happen that are individualized, but that create delays. There's also just things that get lost because that's what happens when a lot of people are working on a lot of cases. They generally can be resolved. Your case manager's usually on top of it. You're usually on top of it, which is a good thing, not a bad thing. We would encourage you not to try to reach out to the government directly because that can create problems in your case, but to work through your case managers, work through your facilities that's hiring you. There are a lot of steps we can take to fix and to get you if you're lost in the queue. But what you don't want to be too concerned about is I'm at the 10-month mark after my I-140 approval and I still don't have an interview. You're still within that range that we think is a normal range. You're not out of order. You're not in problems right now. When you are, there are things that can be done. And right now, today, we're seeing pretty rare major delays, which is good news. Good news.
Yeah, really good. So between you, just to summarize, Mike, you had said that from the time a petition is approved, that what you're seeing currently is 6 to 12 months to the time for someone to get an embassy interview.
Correct.
All right. Fantastic. All right. We're going to keep moving along. We still have a lot to cover, and we want to have some time for questions. Not that we want to get into any type of political debate here, Mike, but just any general comments quickly on the current administration in the U.S. and immigration. And maybe I'll tie that in to the next slide. Maybe we kind of cover both of them. And that is, is there any legislative or regulatory changes or reform that you think we might see here going forward in 2023?
Okay, so compared to what we experienced under the Trump administration, President Biden is like Santa Claus when it comes to immigration, business immigration. However, that's just really a surface view. Sure, President Biden came in and his administration reversed virtually all of Trump's anti-business regulatory policies. But President Biden has not historically been a major supporter of business immigration, not in all the years that he was in the Senate. He's not really been anti, but he's not really been a major supporter. So he certainly didn't push for immigration reform during his first 2 terms. Variety of reasons for that, but nonetheless, he didn't. There were, however, a lot of positive agency actions he put into place that some affected healthcare workers, mainly here in the U.S., though, such as automatic work authorization renewals, expediting for healthcare EADs, and things like that. So generally, we would look and go, he's positive on immigration, but not overly positive and certainly not going to push. Now, legislation in 2023, as most people know, we have a divided Congress, very narrow majority in the Senate for the Democrats and very narrow majority for the Republicans. There's been a major shift when we look at business immigration in the past 8 years, in that historically pro-business immigration was proposed and pushed by the Republicans, not the Democrats. And with the Trump administration that came in, that has completely shifted. So now we have a smaller group of Republicans who are pro-business immigration, but a very small group. And frankly, a group of Democrats who are pro-business immigration. All of a sudden, in my opinion, this is freebie, simply because it's an anti-Trump policy as opposed to any policy they had before. Right. So the idea of us getting any pro-business immigration legislation passed in 2023, I think, is extremely unlikely. There was already an announcement this morning by the Republican House that they're taking up some anti-immigration provisions. They do not affect business immigration. So when you hear things about we're trying to reduce immigration, and that was the headline this morning, Republican proposal to reduce immigration, it has nothing to do with business, employment-based immigration. It's all border issues. So I would expect nothing in 2023. I'd love to be pleasantly surprised. If we do get anything passed, I think healthcare would be a good carve out. And I think we have a lot of people pushing for that, advocating on behalf of it. I think retrogression and some relief in retrogression has also been at the top of the table for several years now. That would be something that we could pretend if we're going to be positive and outlook, but I just think it's unlikely.
All right. Thanks for that, Mike. So what you're saying is nothing's really changed over the last 20 years.
Pretty much.
Going back, Mike, and maybe we'll kind of land on this question and then transition over to some Q&A. Earlier you had shared the good news that we're not in retrogression. It's the priority dates are, with the exception of India and China, are expected to remain current for the foreseeable future. So just what general advice would you give to, let's start with an international registered nurse. What advice would you give to someone who's just thinking about starting their immigration journey to the U.S.? And then secondly, what tips might you share with nurses that might be partway through that journey and how they can best complete that to come to the U.S. in the shortest possible time?
Yeah, I would say the most important thing to get started is focusing on your credentials, focusing on what qualifies you, what makes you attractive to an agency that's hiring you to be placed at one of their facilities. And obviously that starts with NCLEX for RNs. Any other licensing exam would depend upon the occupation. But I would start with that. That is much more important. All the immigration stuff is not nearly as important as that baseline. And beyond that, the area that I find that most people have a problem, if they're going to have a problem, is in the English language exam, even after they passed NCLEX. So focus on those things. And obviously a company like WorldWide is going to help you and provide support and things like that for those. But I would focus on those credentials. Now, turning to the immigration part of it, I think one of the things that's really important, if you're working in some other country and you're say a native Filipino and you're working right now in the UAE, is choose your consulate wisely, okay? Because it is difficult to change consulates once your case is already moving forward. So, and by saying choose wisely, I mean, we've got to think about you. We've got to think about your family. Where are you going to be living when we get to this stage? Or is your contract in the UAE already going to be up? So you're going to be back in the Philippines. Is your contract going to be still going on and you're working there, but your family's not there? What's the practicality of you? And it's not a one size fits all. It's not well, I heard the consulates in the UAE, in Dubai, do appointments faster than Manila, so I want to stay there. But if your family's not there, it may make your whole process longer, more difficult, more stressful because you and your family are separated. So think about beginning to end. And then I think one of the other things that I say is extremely important is you need to find a right fit for a facility where you're going to work in the U.S. from both a geographical location, but also from what type of work you want to do. Be picky, be choosy. If you have family here in the U.S. and you've got a sister that lives in the middle of Iowa, okay, and she loves Iowa, don't take the first job that comes along and it's in Philadelphia. You're not driving and hanging out with your sister for the weekend because it's too far. It's not sufficient to go, hey, I got to the U.S., that's good enough, because that's going to create problems for you and your employer, creates breaches of contracts and all kinds of other issues that are just not good for you, not good for your employer. So think long term. Think about you and be a little picky, be a little choosy today. I think as an applicant, you have some power today to say, hey, I want to hold out for this particular type of work. I want long-term care. I want skilled nursing. I want X, whatever it is that you think you want. Work with your case managers to find a good fit for you. It'll make your journey better. And then the last thing I'll say that Ron mentioned a little bit earlier is don't do a whole lot of comparisons between your case and your buddy's case, your friend's case that did that 2 years ago or that going to do later, because there are not a lot of comparisons. I think those would be my thoughts.
All right, Mike, that's great, super helpful, I'm sure, to nurse candidates here. Just real quick, in a minute or two, similar thoughts, if anything, different perhaps for individuals that aren't registered nurses. Advice for someone who may be a med lab tech or a radiography tech or perhaps a physical therapist. Any thoughts on things that these applicants might be doing to help prepare themselves for their U.S. immigration journey?
Well, I would say for those, a couple things. One is there are multiple paths as opposed to an RN, which means that your path is a little more complex. And so you need to understand that means a couple things. Number one, it may take longer. There may be more steps involved, more hurdles that you have to understand you're going to have to deal with. Number two, because there's multiple paths, it means that you're going to have to make some decisions as to what's best for you, your family, and your facility. Faster is not always better. So you're going to have to make some choices as to I'd like to go this route or I'd like to go this route. But again, I would still focus on those things like credentialing, qualifications, English test, etc. I still think are the most important things to at least have down or be close to before you get serious about this. Because without those, you're not really going anywhere.
All right. Terrific. So just before we transition over to our Q&A time here this morning, I just want to remind everyone that's been with us here during our session today. We've had almost 400 of you with us here live and in real time. At the top of the chat screen, you'll see a yellow section there. We call it a Post-it note. And just if you are an applicant who has not yet applied for assistance with WorldWide HealthStaff, we have recruiters, staff from our recruiting team standing by right now for you to connect with. So at the top of our chat screen, you'll see a link there. And if you click on that, if you are a new applicant, this would allow you to actually interact live and in real time with one of our recruiters. This is not a link that will enable you right in the moment to connect with your case manager if you're an existing applicant. And as always, please continue to work with your case manager as closely as you can. They're in the best position and have the most up-to-date information on your case. So CJ and Tracy, I know you've been monitoring the questions that have been flowing through here during our session here today, and like to take the next few minutes and see if we can respond to some of the questions. So if you would please call those out, and I'll ask Mike to respond.
All right, thanks, Ron. Yeah, we have a few questions from the chat. So hello, everyone. I am CJ Campos, and I'm a part of the marketing team here at WorldWide HealthStaff. So I'm joining you with the Q&A session today. So I've seen a lot of questions here. So without further ado, let's start with the first one. So here's a question from Albert, and he said, how long does it take to receive the fee bill? Is there any delay this time?
How long does it take to receive a fee bill, Mike?
Yeah, so fee bills right now running about 4 to 6 weeks after approval. We're not seeing any major delays like we were earlier in the year. That process is running fairly smoothly right now.
Mike, if someone has an approved case and it's been 7 weeks or 9 weeks or 10 weeks without a fee bill being issued, what are your thoughts in that scenario?
Yeah, it's one of two things has happened. Either there's something at the NVC where they have your case, but they haven't actually taken the action, or more likely that your case did not properly get transferred from the USCIS Service Center that processed it to the National Visa Center. So the first thing we try to do is determine where's the holdup, where is your case actually at, and then after that we can usually solve the problem. And it does happen sometimes, but it's not terribly common. I would not even say it's 1 out of 50.
Okay, all right, very good. CJ, next.
All right, next question. This one is from Rodelyn, and she said, Can I-140 be filed without ETA 9089 certifications?
It depends upon the occupation. If you're an RN, by the way, the ETA 9089 is a form that's used for something called PERM or labor certification. It is required to immigrate for all occupations in the U.S. except for RNs and PTs. So RNs and PTs use the ETA 9089 simply as a form that has to be filled out for data purposes. For every other occupation, med techs, doctors, lawyers, engineers, they have to go through something called labor certification. That's a process going through the Department of Labor where the facility has to do recruitment under the, not necessarily supervision, but under the direction of the Department of Labor to demonstrate that there is a shortage of U.S. workers in this occupation at this specific wage at this specific geographic location. And the approval of that is called a certification. So ETA 9089 certification is required before you file the I-140 for all occupations except for RNs and PTs.
Okay, very good. CJ, do we have 1 or 2 more questions in the few minutes we have remaining here?
All right, sure. Yeah, we have here 2 more questions. So it says here, are there any negative effects on your immigration process if you marry an American citizen during your process?
So the question was about getting married, and we're not talking about just the whole negative implications of getting married, right? We're just talking about immigration. So, but generally what would happen if you marry a U.S. citizen during your process is you would determine which is faster for you. Is it faster to finish the process you're in? Maybe you're already getting ready to be scheduled for an interview. And if so, you might be faster to finish that process. Or is it faster to go the U.S. citizen sponsorship route? There are no queues for marriage to a U.S. citizen. So that's one of the factors. The second factor that I think is extremely critical is, are you going to be able to still basically meet the terms of your sponsorship. So if a hospital is sponsoring you and you're planning on going work in Kansas and you're going to work at a full-time job and your spouse is living in Denver, then you're not, unless your spouse is moving to Kansas from Denver, then you're not going to be able to finish your sponsorship through your employer because you're not going to work for that employer in Kansas. You're going to live with your spouse in Denver. So timing is certainly a major factor. The second factor is what is your now life plan that potentially has changed as a result of being married. But there's no inherent conflict in that whatsoever. So it's totally fine. It can be easily done.
All right.
Very
Awesome.
good. CJ, well, we have time to take one more question. So if you would share that with us, please.
All right. Last question for today is it illegal for a married EB3 visa applicant to come to the U.S. alone, or are you required to bring your family with you?
You are not required to bring your family with you. There are a lot of families that do what are called follow to join, which is a process where they will come later. The most common scenario we see is kids who are, say, finishing school. If you've got kids who are, say, in their last 2 years of high school, maybe they don't want to come to the U.S. and transition into new schools. And so they would do something called follow to join. So it is perfectly normal. Your life choices are extremely important and can be taken into consideration in all the immigration decisions. And if that's the best for your family, it can be easily accommodated.
Well, thank you, Mike. CJ, thanks for relaying those questions. I know that there's many more that we haven't been able to get to. But if you'd like to contact WorldWide HealthStaff directly, I will certainly respond, and we'll ask Mike to help us in some of those responses, depending on the question. As we conclude our time together this morning or this evening, depending on where you are, again, just a friendly reminder to be watching for an email that you'll get tomorrow with the replay of this presentation. Please feel free to go back and review some or all of what was shared today. A lot of great information from Mike on processing times, just processing generally, what to expect in the foreseeable future. And also feel free to share this link with any of, as I said, any of your colleagues, friends or colleagues that you think would benefit from this information as well. So Mike, thanks. As always, thanks for the great information shared today. Thank you to everyone who took the time out of your day to join us today. We do appreciate it. We hope this time has been helpful to you. I'll wish you all a great day, great success on whatever your path to the United States may be. We look forward to assisting those of you that would have an interest in us doing that. And we'll look forward to welcoming many of you to the United States here either this year, next year, or sometime soon. So, Mike, any closing thoughts that you would share?
No, but thanks for the time, Ron. I appreciate it and enjoy doing these. And good luck to everyone, and hang in there. Don't let little bumps in the road deter you from what is your dream and your path.
All right. With that, we'll conclude our session for today. Again, thank you for your participation and for your interest. And please be on the lookout for further webinar sessions that we present on a variety of topics that may be of interest, and we'd certainly welcome you to join us at that time. Thank you, and bye for now.
Thanks.